people always think we're attacking NASA, and we're actually NASA enthusiasts when it comes right down to it, right?
Space enthusiasts.
Yes, we're space enthusiasts. We want accountability. We want disclosure. We want to see what's actually there, and we will support the limitations. We will accept the limitation. We'll support the limitations on what's capable of doing. We don't need to keep researching in and find out, all we're looking at is CGI. If you can't do it, say so. I was thinking about the amount of research that we actually have to do. We have to then decide the research we're doing, whether we're looking at factual information or futuristic type of dreams, right? When you're looking at all of the data. And the amount of time that we've spent, like you yourself, Marcus, you say 30 years. Well, it isn't. It's your entire lifetime.
Yeah, it is.
Right? As a space enthusiast, you go back to the early 60s when Kennedy announced that they're going to go to the moon and back, right? Sparked your interest, and you're sitting watching all of the stuff. You're grabbing every piece of information that's being put out there for the media, and you're reading that stuff. You're an enthusiast. You've been that in your entire life. That all becomes part of your research.
That's true, yeah.
The compiled data. And I was thinking about that. It's not just, I didn't just start this many years ago. I was a space enthusiast by the time probably I was 10 years old. You're in the mid-60s there, and I was in high school when they launched all of this stuff. All of that information that you've acquired over those years is part of the collective research that you've actually done.
That's a good point. Very good point.
So people don't need to look at us and say, we just look at it. That comment that Graham Hancock made, he said, you can't let yourself get in the way. When he's writing a book after he compiles all the data, he said, you can't let yourself get in the way. When we see people commenting about us, that is them getting in the way of themselves when they're commenting, right? They don't fully understand our viewpoint, our position that we've taken in here. We want to see it succeed, but we want to know where the limitations are.
And we want honest information.
Yeah. I don't know how many years I looked at those photographs, and you really didn't see anything. And like I said, when I got so immersed into it, I became the person behind the camera. All of a sudden, I wasn't letting myself get in the way, because all the preconceptions, everything I was taught my entire life is blocking what you're visually seeing. That's very, very important. That blocks that. Your preconceived ideas that man went to the moon, they did this and this. You can look at that photograph forever and not see anything. But when you get yourself out of the way, like I said, I became the man behind the camera. And I physically, when I'm looking at the photographs, I knew where I was on the set. Which is left, which is right, where the lamp is, everything, all of that stuff around you is there. You're immersed that fully into it. And the other thing about looking for information, when you're looking for photographs, it's not like, where's Waldo? You got a scene of Where's Waldo, or the little hidden secret ones that the kids play. There's the list of the items, and you got to go find them. You have no idea what you're looking for. There is no list, what you're looking for, what's wrong in the photograph. Something that is there that shouldn't be there is one thing. The next step is what's missing. That's even harder to find. You're looking at a photograph. There's something that should be there that isn't. Then you get to the Buzz Aldrin photograph. The missing item cannot be seen by the camera even if you took the picture. It's inside the craft. The only thing is Buzz Aldrin is in the same physical space where that item is supposed to be. That's the critical difference with Buzz Aldrin in that doorframe. So if he wasn't there and you took the photograph, the item that's missing still cannot be seen by the camera. That kind of discovery takes years to be able to put all of that together so that your mind is free enough to be able to realize these very subtle changes in a photograph.
Many people are listening to what we're saying and asking questions. As you already noticed, Robert, there are people asking questions all the time. And NASA are getting very worried because they're going to have to come up with the information. That's what you say, Scott. They've got to be honest with us. They've got to say, this is what we know, this is what we're uncertain about, and this is what we know is dangerous. But they're not saying that.
We won't criticize them for being honest.
No, exactly. Of course we won't.
Even if they come back and say we can barely get into low Earth orbit, or we can only go this far with a manned mission for this many hours, right? Just a few hours and we can get up there and back and that's it.
We were going through the Artemis mission, and I pulled up all of the comments. There was only 3 comments there that had something positive to say. All the rest of it was fake. Why do you have these cameras showing such crappy photography? I could take a better photograph in my backyard with my cell phone, and this goes on and on. So what I did was I took a video shot of all of those comments rolling down, and that's going to be in this next video that's coming out.
NASA, the one live site we had that had 10.9 million subscribers, and there was, 38 people watching? All of those were like that. There was, how many of them? Millions of subscribers and nobody watching it. It's an animation. Some of them were just static. And again, it said, live stream tracker. And all you get is the static animation images and just the distance from the Earth, distance to the Moon, and the speed that it's traveling at in the little thing. That's the only thing you're getting. Nobody's going to watch that. That's why when you got 10 million subscribers and you got 38 viewers when it's live, I mean, it's ridiculous.
If NASA are reading those comments, they're going to get a bit of a wake-up call, because people are not believing what they're seeing, reasonably enough. We've been shown enough fake stuff that we can recognize it. We can see it's fake. And that's what the comments are saying. You know, let's have them at $4 billion per launch. We want our money back. NASA really are not doing a particularly good job with this one. Their PR machine is failing. The PR machine at the time of Apollo was very effective. It did its job. With Artemis, which is just as important to NASA, maybe even more so, they're not working. It's not working at all.
Do you think today's employees at NASA, because they are so far disconnected, like you've got many generations in between from Apollo on, and they've grown up, they're in their 20s or 30s, whatever, they've grown up with computer technologies and everything else. Do they think when they're putting this up that it's acceptable? Do they not know better? Do they think the general public will accept the fact that they're putting just stupid little CGI up without detail, without any logic? I think that's the case.
I think NASA are getting a real reality check here, because up till now they haven't really had feedback from their customers, the American taxpayer. Now they're getting it. What are they going to do about it?
You could show me Atari Lunar Lander game footage, much more believable. But you look at all of these comments here, right? They're all negative, like really bad. It's bad.
I think NASA are getting a real reality check on this one.
They've got to do something more than what they're doing. If they can't do what they say they're doing, they're just going to have to come clean. I mean, they will eventually, they'll just lose their funding, because don't forget, if they can't please the American people in what they're doing, if this is the comments from them, the people will not wish to pay taxes towards this kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
They simply don't want it.
And seeing as it's Congress that determines the budget that NASA can use, if the constituents are starting to push back against their congressman, there's going to be a negative approach to NASA. Funding will be cut, and they'll all get overexcited. But the NASA PR department, the NASA publicity machine, has not cranked into action. They're not responding or creating the story that they want us to watch.
I think the biggest thing right after the launch, the first comment I heard from NASA, they were talking about the damage to the launch tower itself and everything else. And it's, oh, don't worry, you know, the gateway stuff and everything else to get everything out there can be done by Elon Musk.
Well, they haven't built the gateway yet.
No, they haven't built it yet. Actually, on their website, they have images of them inside packing all of the equipment inside of it. They're packing all the consumables inside the machine ready to launch.
Yeah, that's called animation.
Yeah, and they're going to turn that over now to Musk because they have a damaged launch tower and they wouldn't be able to rebuild that thing in time to launch anything. It just doesn't make sense. Musk, his equipment is different.
Yeah, it is. It's much simpler. Much more straightforward.
But they just can't modify a piece of equipment to attach it to launch. Completely different setup.
If we weren't so conspiratorially minded, we would say that that was deliberate, so they didn't have to do another launch, because they wrecked their launch tower. How convenient is that? So they built all the rockets, they've got more SLS rockets built, ready for EM mission, Exploration Mission 2, which is the orbit of the moon with astronauts on board. Then EM3, which is the landing on the moon. They've got all those rockets built, all ready, all scheduled. You can see it on the NASA website. They know when they're going to launch them, so they say. But if they haven't got a launch tower, that's all not going to happen. And that launch tower is a complete mess, designed by 3 companies that didn't communicate with each other.
Don't forget that includes the transporter from their building out, because that thing is actually sitting on that transporter. It gets damaged. It's crazy.
It is crazy. The whole thing is crazy. It's almost like they set themselves up to fail, not to succeed. It's very sad, because as enthusiasts of space travel, human space travel, or space travel generally, to see the incompetence being displayed by NASA right now, it's dispiriting. No wonder people are getting angry about it and posting adverse comments.
That goes back to the standard liftoff that they have using basically the shuttle engines there and the solid rocket boosters. And you see how fast that thing actually launched that. Where is its capability to lift weight that they were claiming? Because that thing is nowhere near it. It was lifting maybe 20% what they claimed that there was going to have, because all it had was a fuel tank and Orion sitting on top of that thing. Nowhere near the capability. And you see it come off on their first stage when the solid boosters come off there. They're nowhere at near speed compared to what it could be at speed. That's the speed it should be doing if it was fully loaded. They were actually slower than the Saturn V rocket was. Like, they were at 42 miles total for height and downrange total when the solid rocket boosters came off. And then, of course, all they have left is that fuel tank and 3 little engines. 3 on the space shuttle.
All these left over after they had built the space shuttle, they had spare engines, so they stuck them on the SLS. So what we're looking at here is space shuttle technology enlarged to about 20%. So it's 40-year-old technology we're watching here. It's not new stuff.
What they launched there with those things, now you compare that, those engines don't have anywhere near the thrust. They're running at 200,000 pounds on each one of those. And you take a look at Musk, and he's got 500,000 pound engines, and he's got 32 of them under there.
Yes, he's got a lot. It's going to be fun making sure they all fire together.
Yeah, but he's using methane, getting more thrust, and he's got 5 times more engines, and he's not lifting any more weight. Where does that put the SLS? You just can't go with the solid boosters and say they took all the thrust and then have these little Roman candles pissing out the back once you're up so far, because you're not going to make it to orbit.
And then you've got to get from orbit up to escape velocity.
But I think something is going on here. I mean, they definitely sent something up there, and there is something around the moon, and I still think it's real. But what they're doing is they're putting in these fake slides along with it so that you can't tell what is real. And they did the same thing with Apollo. So the real question is, why? Why are they doing it? I mean, they've got the moon wrong. It's completely backwards in that one shot.
Yes, it is.
That machine didn't have enough fuel to do a translunar injection. You fire it once and you coast the rest of the way. If it takes 6 days, they weren't going fast enough, they'd be pulled back. That's the problem there.
If that speed indicator on the tracking film showing the velocity of 1,600 plus miles per hour, that isn't going fast enough, because Apollo approached the same point going over 2,000 miles an hour. And that was captured by the moon's gravity and sped up to 6,000.
The orbit is calculated at 60 miles at 6,000 miles an hour. Artemis is out there at 1,600 miles an hour in some kind of an elliptical orbit. The moon's going to grab it and pull it down.
But that tells you everything that we've been seeing with Apollo is completely wrong. I mean, they're right back to the radiation problem again. And this is another thing that people are mentioning in the comment section. Why are they putting all this effort and equipment on there to measure radiation, cosmic radiation, whatever radiation they're picking up? And this was supposed to be done and dusted 55 years ago. It's done. They have all of the equipment. They have all the data. They've analyzed it. Why go through this all over from scratch again? Because that's what they're doing. And people are picking up on this because you just have to read the chats.
Even the X-37B going up for like 9 months and stuff like that. The X-37B, to me, looks exactly like the space shuttle. It has the bays that open at the back, except it's unmanned. They're putting it up into low Earth orbit, and apparently they're putting electronics on board in that bay, and they are measuring the damage of vacuum and radiation on that equipment in there, and then of course it's coming back to Earth so they can examine it, which means they don't have any diagnostic tools on board. They physically need it to come back to be able to examine the damage on the stuff. We don't know whether this electronic equipment is being turned on and fired and operated, or is just sitting there static. But if you need to do that today, if you don't know what the result is of vacuum and radiation on electronics, why the hell not?
Yep.
You've got how many satellites out there? They must know. And they're doing the same thing with Artemis. They're testing the radiation of the equipment on there on that particular journey. X-37B is doing it, and there is no information. You cannot find out exactly what they're doing. Even the other NASA parrots, like Fraser Crane, I was watching him, and he's talking about it, and he said, why can't I get it? Like, there should be more information on the X-37B. It goes up and spends months up there and comes back, and nobody has the results on it, right? Where are the documents on the test results of that kind of testing? And why do they need to do it today? That was done in the 1950 when Van Allen put the tests up there. That gave them all the data they needed to know back then on radiation. Why do they need it now?
And look what they also measured with Apollo. I mean, they had all those radiation detectors on those ships that were going around the moon. Apollo 8, that was the first one that they sent an expedition with man on it around the moon. But before that, they had radiation detectors on board. It's done. Why do it again?
Because the radiation figures that they've produced for Apollo, each of the Apollo missions, they produce radiation figures. They're very similar to the radiation figures from the ISS right now, which is below the Van Allen belts. And Apollo was measuring it on the moon. It makes no sense. Absolutely no sense at all. Don't forget Zelga and Zohar, the two crash test dummies on Orion. They're measuring radiation effects on these crash test dummies. Now, whether we'll see the results of those, I have no idea. Probably not. This radiation problem, and it's interesting, it's coming up on the comments below the official NASA website, or NASA launch site, because people are fully aware of the problems. I mean, we've been talking about them for years now. A lot of people have mentioned the radiation problem, and how do you solve it? And remember that famous comment I was given when I asked at a talk organised by the British Interplanetary Society when they invited an atomic scientist from the UK Atomic Energy Research Centre. And I said, how did the Apollo missions survive the radiation that you and I know exists in space? And her answer was classic: the luck of Apollo. Luck may apply once, but it doesn't apply multiple times. So people are now picking up on the fact that the radiation problems have not been adequately answered. I'm not saying they haven't been addressed. I'm sure that NASA are trying to work out what these radiation levels are. But so far, we have no information. I mean, it's very easy to do. You put a Geiger counter on the rocket and see what the readings are. Geiger counters measure radiation. If the count goes up, there's more radiation. It's not rocket science. It's just basic science.
They don't need to have a big machine go up there. They can launch any very small probe out there and let it do the readings anytime they want. There's the front and the back. On the front side, there's the Artemis showing that crater right there with the radial lines on the near side. And there's what the far side of the moon is, as NASA claims. And there's that crater right there. all fuzzed out as it slides by. There it is right there, coming into view there. Robert and I looked at that carefully to make sure that those radial lines line up.
But let's just say, even if it was this one up here, it doesn't matter, because this you cannot see from where they are. These guys here, because when you look at where the Earth is, so let's just see where the Earth is here first. Okay, we should be seeing this side here from the spacecraft.
We should be. Why aren't we?
And yet we're seeing the near side, which is this.
They got it messed up. Like I said, one of the guys in the comments said that just looks like they're shooting at a potato and just put it out of focus a little bit.
So now if you were on the Earth here, you would see the far side.
I wasn't looking up at the sky when they did that, when NASA did that. They turned it around. Just amazing what happens in the universe these days.
I mean, that's impossible.
We'll have to phone the guys at Downey Studios and tell them they've got the images wrong. And if you're that close to the moon, we can see all of the detail of the moon. How come that thing is just a gray ball?
That's a good point.
Even that other image they claimed at 80 miles. Yeah, that one. You should be able to see so much detail on the moon from any of the images they're doing. We get more detail than that with a pair of binoculars. And if they're on the backside of the moon on this side, that should be absolutely violent with impact craters, right?
Look at how different this is. To me, the Earth is the right size for where this craft is parked. The sun shining on the back of that craft there where it says NASA, now that's going to flood out whatever stars there is out there because the camera's looking at that light. So you're not going to see the stars from that point of view. There's no way. There's too much light there.
That's a good enough excuse for NASA, I guess. You look at the thing, it says tracker and video there. So the only thing live is so-called are the velocity and the distance from the Earth and the distance from the moon, right?
But you see this, I mean, there's your animation right down here. I still think this is live. I don't have any problem with any of this stuff because of the way the camera's facing. It's facing into that light. But the thing is, too, is that we've seen so much fantasy. We've seen them try to pull all kinds of stunts in the past.
But you still have to question whether this is real or isn't. It's so different from the rest of it, none of it seems to be real. They're showing here 43,246 miles from the moon. The detail that we can see from Earth on the moon is not present in this. And this is on the back side of the moon, like with the impact craters on the far side of the moon are absolutely incredible compared to the side that we see. And it's not there, it's a smooth ball. I don't care if they're using a 480p resolution on the thing. The physical size of that is about the same viewing as you would see from Earth. You'd still see the detail. And then they're showing detail on the Earth in that thing, but nothing on the moon.
On the far side of the moon, or the backside, or the bit we don't see, there is a very visible crater, recognizable crater. It's called the Tsiolkovsky crater. It's not a circular crater, it's a bit jagged edge, but in the center of it there is a very recognizable highlight, which is the sort of central peak. And that is on the left-hand side of the moon. And we don't see it on that image. It should be there. And it's big enough and recognizable enough to appear on virtually every photograph of the far side of the moon. So why aren't we seeing it? Because it's an animation and they forgot to put it in. Now, if it's an animation, that's exactly what we saw on Apollo. It was all animation on Apollo until they got the films back and they could put it out. And sometimes they got it wrong. I think they're getting it wrong here because they're not keeping up to date with it. And whoever's putting out this animation obviously hasn't examined the Apollo animation and compared it to the reality of the film or the TV images from Apollo. They haven't done it, so they get it wrong. And it's interesting what you say, Robert. There are people in the comment asking really quite pertinent questions about Artemis. What about the radiation? Why don't we hear about that? If there are solar flares out there, why don't we hear about that? And bear in mind that Artemis is basically a 20-year-old design. It's the old space shuttle setup. 2 solid fuel boosters on either side and a big yellow fuel tank in the middle. That's what they used on the shuttle launch system. It's not really a new rocket. And the problem they had with the mobile launch tower, which did get damaged, was that it wasn't designed for the SLS rocket. It was designed for the Ares rocket 10 years earlier. So the whole thing was cobbled together, and if they can't now use the mobile launch tower, which they use for Artemis 1, they've got to get Artemis 2 off the ground in about 6 months' time. It looks like there's going to be a problem with that.
I think from the comments when I was watching some of the videos that they're going to turn everything over to Musk. He's going to be doing the launch. They've got a couple of launch towers for his equipment. Anything to do with the space shuttle, I think those towers have been removed already. They've already been demolished.
You know what's strange about this, too, is that you can go to channel to channel to channel to channel, and they all say that live from the moon. They give you the time, they give you the date, today, Monday, 28th November, 2022, time 2:28, 2:29, whatever, and it's counting down. Now they're back to the moon. They were just having an eclipse.
And they say this is closest flyby. Well, if it's closest flyby, we should be seeing far more detail. Unless they're flying by at night, in which case we won't see very much at all.
One thing that this fellow was saying in that video yesterday, when he was showing all of the colors that the moon actually has, when these private people are taking photographs and video from their backyard telescopes, and they've put these adaptive lenses on there to cut down that waving that you get. And you should see the colors that are on that moon. I mean, it's beautiful. And this is not what we're getting, but I can start seeing that there's colors down here on the left side, which you never see in any of those Apollo videos. You don't see that in any of the footage. This is moving. Apollo 10 sits there. It doesn't go anywhere.
You'd think they'd do a flyby when you can actually see something.
In the comment section this morning, that was another thing people were saying. They were saying that the Apollo landing sites, when NASA was taking these videos, why did they take them in the dark? Because they claimed that the Apollo landing sites were taken when it was going around in the dark.
It certainly seems to be bad planning that NASA can't get a decent picture.
Yeah, and another comment, a fellow was saying that they turned the cameras off when they were going over the Apollo landing sites. So what is the truth?
They didn't want you to see that there's nothing there. If there was something there, it's not what we've been told is there.
That view that you've got up there is the one that claimed that they were at 80 miles.
You should see a lot more detail than that.
You could see that with a set of binoculars. Actually, right there, it just gets fuzzy. Look at that, nothing.
And where's the Tsiolkovsky crater? It's the most prominent feature on the far side of the moon.
This is a previous day, which means that the far side of the moon was lit. You see that crater there with all the radial lines on it? That's the side we see. And they were showing it as being lit. And a few days ago, we had a new moon. The 23rd of November was a new moon. So that's wrong. What they're showing there in that image right there is completely wrong. See that crater up on the top right-hand side? We can see that crater from Earth.
Right.
They're showing that as being lit. On the 23rd of November this year, it was a new moon. So that should be in complete darkness.
Yeah, but it depends where these guys are.
We see that crater from Earth.
Yeah, that's...
And it's a new moon on the 23rd of this month.
If that is the Copernicus crater, which has some very prominent radial lines near it, and it's in that position on the moon, on the left-hand side, if that's the Copernicus crater, and it's lit like it is, then the Apollo landing site should be visible, because there's enough illumination on the moon.
And now they're showing that they're on the far side of the moon, because the Earth is there, and it's fully lit.
It's a mystery, I don't know.
How do you see that crater? It was in total darkness.
See, look at the way the Earth was over on the right side. Now they're coming around this way.
And that's all the far side of the moon.
There's the radial lines that you see from the Earth.
That's right, and that's in total darkness. The Earth cannot be on the far side of that image, because the image of the moon right there is completely wrong, which means that's a total animation. 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 Animation.